we have liquid oxygen that we convert into oxygen. And at one time we saw the needle going down. So pilot comes down, he's like, Ken, something's going on with liquid oxygen. And you figure it out because immediately there was tracers and gunfire and everything. And so I get out the back. I have 2 9mm and an M16. I crawl underneath the aircraft and I go into the nose. I look into the nose and it's a giant snow cone. And I'm like, holy shit, like this is like serious. So I was born in East Meadow, New York, but raised in Florida.
And was there a history of military service in your family?
Yes, my grandparents, my grandfathers both served in World War II, and so, but not my dad, and my brother was in the Army.
Okay. So why did you decide to join the service, and why did you choose the Air Force?
I think this is a common story among some folks, is it's either that or, maybe jail or who knows. At one point I was homeless, so the Air Force and the military provided a way out of structure and better be a better citizen. Yeah.
Any particular reason you chose the Air Force?
Yeah, actually, in '97, the recruiter showed up to one of my classes that I was a particular troublemaker in, and he was decked out, looked really good, and really embarrassed me in front of my peers. And I finally realized that I probably wasn't on the track that I thought I was, and that professionalism really made an impact on me. Still my best friend to this day.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that was very impressionable on me. But a couple months later, my sister passed, and that really created a massive change in the way that my brain worked and how my family worked. And at that point, I knew, life is very precious and finite, and I really need to, pick it up and get serious.
Wow. Where did you go for training?
Well, I went to basic military training in San Antonio for the Air Force, yeah. And I enlisted too. That was my first journey.
Exactly. And then after basic, where did you go?
I went to Shepherd Air Force Base to become an aircraft mechanic.
Tell me about the mechanics training, and then what happened after that?
I really loved it. It was very structured. It wasn't ambiguous, and it was really important. So we had really good trainers. And my first supervisor, Bill Russo, was amazing. He really taught me to be precise and accurate, and I hadn't really had that in my life. And so it was very impressionable on me as well to improve the way that I do things and the methodology behind it, and have some kind of proof in what I'm doing, and to be accountable.
Now, were you working mainly on the MC-130Es, or was there a wide variety of craft?
Yeah, so training, we had to train on all heavy aircraft. All the systems are basically the same, and then we specialized into a certain one, and the MC-130E was the one that I got, and that's high performance infiltration, exfiltration aircraft, basically designed for what was about to happen to our country.
Mm-hmm. What does the MC-130E mainly do? What kind of missions is it generally used for?
Sure, so it specializes in going across enemy lines, infiltrating that territory, landing, exfilling or dumping off special operators to seize territory on the ground. Also refuels helicopters in flight as well, and it's all blacked out, has green lights in it, and it has terrain following radar, so it can stay real low to the ground. It's pretty sweet aircraft.
Let's focus just for a moment on 9/11 itself. Where were you? What were you doing when you heard the news of the attacks?
Yeah, I was at a friend's house in the morning, and I had just worked a long shift, and I just remember getting the phone call, you better come in. And one of the biggest memories was driving to the gate and seeing a Humvee at the front gate with the barrel pointed at my car as I was arriving in, and I was like, oh my God, it's gonna be serious. And I got at work maybe 30 minutes after the first plane hit, and then I was at work when the second plane hit, and I just remember everyone being totally pale. It's just okay, this is gonna happen. This is real.
And so did that immediately change your assignment, or relatively soon change your assignment?
Yeah, so I was trying to excel in all the areas. So I was taking school, I was going to college, and I was getting credits. And I remember my supervisor going, hey, I want you to be my next officer. And when 9/11 hit, everyone was fighting to go. We only had so many people who could go, so many aircraft. We were just fighting each other to go. It was awesome. And I remember just being told no, like I can't go in the first round because I'm in school and like this is important too, Ken. And that was a big deal. And the second round of folks, like I was allowed to go.
The start of a new year brings big goals. But for a lot of us, big expectations to make dramatic life challenges can feel overwhelming. I can personally attest the pressure of a new year makes it the most stressful part of my calendar. None of us should face life's battles alone. That's why we're proud to note that today's story is sponsored by BetterHelp. Especially in the new year, a lot of us feel stuck or that we're falling behind in life. A therapist from BetterHelp can help untangle external pressures from your internal values. They'll help you develop a timeline that feels authentic for you. And they'll help you work through feelings of comparison, something we all struggle with in a social media-driven world. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy more comfortable and convenient. You can connect with a therapist from 30,000 licensed professionals and easily switch therapists at no extra cost if it's not the right fit. Start fresh any day of the year with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/AVC and get 10% off with your first month of therapy.
When I deployed, what we were doing was picking up special forces, special operators, and folks that were undisclosed, flying incredibly long missions from Karshi-Khanabad, Uzbekistan. It's the only real estate that we had as Americans near the fight, flying over through all the mountains, terrain, following everything, landing at airfields in areas that basically the Taliban still owned, dumping off dudes who would change that situation. And it was super awesome to see that. And that was basically my mission, was flying those aircraft to make sure if anything went wrong, to ensure the mission like succeeded. Because there'd be people on the ground maybe suppressed by enemy fire that we had to augment, landing like nearby. Like it was pretty crazy.
Talk about what it's like to be on one of those missions.
Oh man, it's so awesome. So really there's no place for me. So I had to sleep in what's called the hellhole. And this is a place underneath the cockpit that gets super hot and like it's just all wires and stuff everywhere. And so for me, these missions were super long because Afghanistan's like huge. I mean, it's no man's land. So we had to fly, I think like 6 or 8 hours just to get to where we're going to drop off these folks. And so I'd be sitting on the plane, maybe sleeping or whatever it was. It was always nighttime and it was always a low lunar illumination. So that's a reflection of the sun off the moon. And so there was only a certain parts of the month that were like prime time. And when it was low lunar illumination and folks on the ground needed us, like it was high tempo. So we'd fly over, land, drop dudes out, and then leave. And we had equipment, weapons, trucks, we had workout devices too after a while because people needed to stay fit while they're holed up in like this airfield in the middle of Afghanistan. So pretty much every place in Afghanistan that is well known now, we were landing at before it was a thing to fill it up full of personnel. And that was pretty awesome.
Come under fire at any time?
Oh yeah. So every mission, we would have rounds shooting at us. A couple times RPGs, arguably some man pads. We weren't too sure, which is the portable, we call them stingers. And so, 2 missions in particular changed my life. The first mission was a liquid oxygen. We have liquid oxygen that we convert into oxygen. It's like 800 ratio. So for 800 pieces of liquid oxygen, you get, or for every 1 gram of liquid oxygen, you get 800 breathable grams. So the system was super important because we needed it to fly. And at one time, we saw the needle going down. So pilot comes down, he's like, Ken, something's going on with liquid oxygen, and you should figure it out because if we don't have it, we have to go home. And we have to judge how fast it's depleting. And so I was terrible in high school. I didn't do any math classes. So I'm just like, okay, I got to figure this out. So I'm looking at it, me and the load master's trying to figure it out. And we determined that we can land. Let's get these people off. We had on the radio, they were suppressed, they were getting enemy fire, and they needed these reinforcements. And it's like, look, even if we have to go home and struggle, these people need to land, we need to reinforce. And so I made determination as crew chief to we're gonna continue on. We'll figure this out. And everything was frosting over. It was crazy. And so we landed, and immediately there was tracers and gunfire and everything. And so I get out the back. I have 2 9mm and an M16. I crawl underneath the aircraft and I go into the nose. And I'd look into the nose, and it's a giant snow cone. And I'm like, holy shit, like this is like serious. And so I had to figure out like, what can I do here? And I remember mapping the whole system in my mind and then figuring out, okay, and remember the ECM guys, like the plane lands really hard, so things are going to jumble around. So I'm looking in my mind of like where there's a component that's hanging in space that could like get loose. I stick my hand in this thing, which my hand is still kind of screwed up to this day. I stick my hand in this total like, and I think it's like negative 300 something degrees. This stuff is super cold. So I'm sticking my hand in there and I'm tightening it. I go back, crawl underneath the aircraft, get a wrench, and I'm starting to tighten just random things, just tightening them. I'm trying to clear out all the snow. Meanwhile, pilots are like, gotta get out of here, man. Like these people come up, like this is going to be bad. We are not getting stuck here. And so I crawl back under, I go up, and I'm like, I basically almost lie. And I'm like, it's good. Like I feel good. Like let's do it. Let's go home. Like let's not stay the night here. And they're like, you sure, man? I was like, yeah, let's go. And so we head back, and sure enough, I'm like looking at the gauge, like 21 years old. I'm like, please God, just don't let that, and it never moved, man. And thank God something happened, and I was able to tighten whatever the hell went loose, and we finished that mission, and the guys on the ground, nobody died, and we're pretty happy about that.
Wow.
So that was the first one. Okay, so the next one was actually on my dad's birthday, which is really strange. And I'm flying on the mission, and all of a sudden, I'm in the hellhole, right? And it's getting like super warm, and I move out. For some reason, I move out, and I go underneath. Remember that system they were telling me that could like have issues? Well, what they told me was when it lands really hard, there's this like rubber thing called bellows. And as it lands, the lubricant will go through the bellows, and the bellows will sink into the lubricant. And then it won't work anymore. It won't cool the system. And the system is designed to detect missiles inbound and shoot the flares and potentially chaff to direct the missiles to not hit the aircraft, right? And meanwhile, remember, like we've had these things shoot at our airplanes before. So now I'm underneath this system, and all of a sudden, like I wake up and I'm covered in lubricant, and I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? And I'm delirious because the fumes, and what we called a weapons officer, he comes around, he's like, hey, like we're inbound. I turned on the electronic countermeasures, it's not working. And I was like, oh shit. And I oh my God, this is the scenario. This is the exact scenario. And thankfully, I asked these guys, if this happens, what do we do? And he's like, and they say, you got to shove something in there. So I take off my clothes, right? I take the system open, and I start cramming my clothes to compress the lubricant so it's stable as the plane's flying around on the terrain. So I take all my clothes. I'm in my underwear. I'm cramming all this stuff into this system. And I'm like, hey, man, like fire it up. Like, let's see. We got to make sure it's going to work. He's like, look, everything right now looks okay. Pilot comes down. He's like, there's no way. Like, we're coming into this situation. It was another refuel of humans, of personnel, into a firefight. And he's like, this is a different pilot. He's like, dude, there's no way I'm going in there without this protection. Like, we're going to turn around. Like, everyone in the aircraft could get killed, you know? And I'm like, I think we're good. Weapons officer, we have a powwow in the back. And meanwhile, I'm in garbage bags. No, I'm wearing garbage bags in the plane. And so the plane's filling up with fumes. Pilot's freaking out. And I'm like, look, we've got to do it. We hear it over the radio. They need reinforcements. We're like, let's go, man. Like, I'm confident. Let's do this. And so we continue the mission. We let down in flight the entire back door of the MC-130 to let the fumes. Meanwhile, I have like people from New Zealand and Australia and like special operators are like snake eaters. And they're like, dude, what's going on with the airplane? And we're like, hey man, it's cool. And at that point, like that was a major, huge thing in my life of like, I'm confident. Like I remember this, I did it. I did whatever it took. And then we had like 12 hours, we land, we refuel there, thankfully. And then we're coming back home, and I fall asleep into the hellhole again. And what I didn't know was the pilot contacted the commander, and the commander contacted the CENTCOM commander, and who contacted the Air Force Central Commander, which is now a General Mosley. At the time, it was a colonel. And they put me in for an officer scholarship while I'm flying on the mission. They put me in and they accept me. And so when I land, we're backing in and there's a huge group of people. Everybody in our little unit, like that was at that base, every American was there and they're like celebrating. And I'm coming off the plane, I'm like, what's going on, man? Like, what happened? Is everything okay? And they're like, congratulations. And they give me the letter of acceptance to become an officer. So technically a field commission, but since I didn't have a degree, I couldn't like commission. And they're like, you got to find a college in like 2 weeks, pal. And that was like one of the greatest moments I've ever lived through, ever.
That's amazing.
It was pretty cool.
So how long were you on this deployment over there?
I think it was about 3 months because I had to go to school.
What's the most intense moment related to enemy fire?
I think it was on our base, we got a report that not the Taliban, but another unit was trying to take the base, like they were trying to invade the base. And everyone was woken up. We all ran to the weapons cache, get our weapons, and we're running toward the fence. We're like, hey, you got to meet the enemy, right? They can't get onto the flight line. So I'm running with this weapon, and it's at altitude, and I thought I was going to die. And I get behind this building, and I'm like, I'm going to die before I even meet the enemy. And that was like one of my huge realizations that like fitness is super important, not just mental, but physical fitness. So after that moment of where I thought I was going to die before I even met the enemy, I go back home. I join a college, St. Leo University. I get into ROTC to become an officer. We have our first fitness test. I fail the fitness test. I couldn't even run a half a mile straight. And you have to run 2 miles straight, nonstop. Just doesn't matter if it's 12-minute pace. Can't stop. I stopped at half mile. They disenrolled me. And they wanted to take all of the money that they had spent on me back. And so they essentially sued me for the tuition that they paid to my school. And so here I am coming in, Medal of Heroism, right? Air medal. And I come in and they don't care about any of that. It's like, hey, you got to meet standard, right? I was totally unprepared. And it was a huge, sobering moment in my life. And I was like, I will never be unprepared for a situation ever again. Matter of fact, the gap between me and unprepared is going to be so large that there's not even going to be a question of success. And so I walked onto the cross-country team at St. Leo, and I was like, I'm going to crush this. And I remember the coach, Kyle Sage, still a good friend, laughed at me. He's like, where do they? I remember him biking past me as I was walking, like, where do they find these people? I'm on the cross-country team. So yeah, at that moment, Greg, I was like, there's no way I'm going to be mediocre anymore. Like, this is it. And I started training. Started trying to find, what's the hardest thing? I asked around, what's hard? Triathlon. Okay, let's do it. Sign me up. Rock and roll. So I was doing really good in triathlon. I was applying to the World Class Athlete program in the Air Force. I had went to the Beijing Olympics as an observer, and I was training very hard, but I was still active duty Air Force. So I get deployment orders. So I'm like, oh crap, I haven't even gotten the opportunity to get points to compete. So you need points to compete. And so what was the next race? Well, it happens to be in Florida, where my family is. So I call race director. She's like, yeah, come on. So I fly down to Florida with my bike, everything. Days before I'm supposed to deploy to Iraq for 6 months. Family all flies in, everything. Go on a bike ride. The first day I'm out on a bike ride, I go to Siesta Beach, which is very famous in Florida. I swim 2 miles, get back on my bike, going down the road, and it was a long traffic jam. It was spring break, and I remember a little gap right in front of this SUV, and I look through the window of the SUV, and I see this lady in a sports car on her phone. Remember, this is before like texting and smartphones and stuff, right? And she's like this, driving, and I'm like, oh, she's not looking. She's not going to turn in this gap, right? There's a little apartment complex. So look, I'm going 25 miles an hour on my bike, right? I mean, like I'm hauling. And I remember just pumping a little bit, and she cuts across just at the time where I'm right in front, next to this SUV. And I just remember this car coming, and everything slowed down like 1,000 times. And I remember looking at the car and going, if I continue my speed of rate right now, she's going to run me over and I'm dead. If I slow down too much, I'm going to hit the side. My head's going to go into the window, which is, by the way, not like the front where it's breakable like that. Like the side ones are very strong. Like I'm going to die. Like my head's going to hit this thing. I'm going to die. So I need to hit the tire right there. I remember pumping just enough to hit that tire so that my tire, 2 rubber pieces, hit. And so there's a little bit of cushion, and I can roll across the hood. And that's exactly what I did. I remember flying through the air. My bike is up in pieces and going, shit, I got to buy a new bike before Saturday because I got a race. And I remember shopping in my head, Greg, of all the bike shops in the area where I can pick up a bike before Saturday. As I'm flying through the air, and then I hit the windshield. And as lights out, I slide across the windshield. All the glass that, little pieces of glass just fill up my back. It took years for them to come out, years for all that glass to come out. And then she slams on the brakes, obviously, realizes there's a human being that's flying through her windshield. So I fly off into the gravel and slide across the gravel, hit my head, and I'm gone, right? I'm up. I'm floating above my body.
You had a traumatic brain injury, but it didn't manifest itself in ways that are considered common. Explain what symptoms you were dealing with here.
Sure. Man, you did your homework. So up until that point, we'd had like 7 years in Iraq, and brain injuries were like people missing parts of their brain, right? And so executive level processing was really like the benchmark of brain injury, where I didn't have that. Like my reptilian brain was hit. And so like I could still sort of function. I couldn't really speak or read, but like I still could like look like I'm okay. And so, I'm calling back. I'm going, hey, I'm like messed up here. Like I'm really messed up. And they're like, well, you sound okay. You need to come back and get care. And I'm like, no, I don't even know what's going on. And like, you need to get here, or we're sending, you're going to be AWOL, right? Which is actually deserted because I had a clearance. And so like I'm like, okay, I got to figure out how to get home. So I remember being at the airport like totally lost. Just like I see a police officer, hey, you know where I'm supposed to go? I couldn't read the signs, couldn't do anything. And so it manifested in such a way that the medical community was not prepared for. Neither was the military. There's no disqualifying deployment for people who all of a sudden just had a brain injury, couldn't read, couldn't speak, couldn't remember anything. So I still had to deploy. That's where we're at.
They still sent you to Iraq, and from what I understand, it was completely miserable.
It was miserable. It was. I was embedded with Special Forces, some SEALs, Rangers, and it was unforgiving. And I was an Air Force guy embedded in an Army unit, which is not really viewed very well, And so that was tough. And then not remembering things, it was very tough. I'd write them on my arm. Thank God it was very creative in the way that I was trying to mask this, and still get the mission done. At one point, Greg, I was in charge of all the air reconnaissance and surveillance assets in the entire country. It was 50. I was in charge of all of them. It was crazy. No idea what I was doing. It's 90 chat rooms up on my little chat box to control all these aircraft, talk to people. It was oh my God, how am I going to survive? I was sleeping at my desk, and it was miserable. In addition to the heat and shells coming into our compound, I mean, it was mayhem. Yeah, it was not the place to recover from a brain injury, that's for sure.
Obviously, the injury derailed your Olympic dreams. What was your recovery process like once you got home, and how did you eventually transition into some of these other things like Beastmaster and American Ninja Warrior?
Great. So when I was in Iraq, I was in a lot of pain, but I couldn't really feel my body all that much. I just didn't feel good. But I felt good when I ran. So I'd run. I'd just run. And then we had a pool. We had one of Saddam's pools. And so I bought a tether and tied myself to the wall, and I swam in place. So I realized that when my body's in movement, the pain goes away. I don't have to think about my injuries, and I just felt really good. So when I came back, I was like, I'm gonna keep this up. This is wonderful. I'm gonna see what happens. But I do remember coming back and not wanting to do anything also. I just want to say this, I don't want to do anything at all. And that's where I started getting really upset, just about things. I had this great trajectory that I was on, and now I'm barely walking, right? And I remember I coached these little kids in swimming, and this one little girl was like, Coach Ken, are you going to come back? Are you going to be normal again? And I was like, oh my God. And she's like, can you continue working out, continue training, Ken? We want to see where you're going. And when she was come back, I was like, oh my God, I've changed. It changed. It hits hard when a little kid sees that and says it, you know. And that's when I was like, game on. Game on. And I remember, like, I went to the World Championships a few months later, like very fast, like super fast. I was really motivated.
So you not only competed on Beastmaster, you were the winner on your episode.
Yeah.
So for those who haven't seen it, briefly explain what you need to do on Beastmaster. I know there's a lot of different things, but there's basically 4 intense levels that each have several different challenges. A little bit of an example of the variety of things you got to do.
Sure. In short, it is Ninja Warrior on steroids. It is Fear Factor immersive, right? So going through 4 different stages. Each stage has elimination, 50% elimination, and very difficult to interpret the obstacles. And we don't get to play with them ahead of time. We can look at them and sign that, you know, we've seen this. And that's it. And then the cameras come on, the mics come on, and it is like, go.
How'd you figure out inventive ways to deal with the obstacles when you weren't given a chance to play with them?
Yeah, sure. So this goes into a result of my brain injury. I have synesthesia, and I have very interesting ways of seeing things. And so my cause-effect relationship is like amped up like 10,000 times. So I see an object, I can make it move around in my head, look at the physics of it, and then picture myself on it, like not only just in like first person view, but like second, even third person, like watch someone else, you know, and I can see myself do it. So I can interpret obstacles pretty well just from this gift that I was given. And so that's super important to do novel, crazy stuff that people are like, oh my God, I would never think about doing that. So it's really just sizing it up, judging my own abilities, and then matching the two.
You've overcome so many challenges in different ways. Obviously, there are people dealing with all sorts of different challenges, and your never give up attitude is certainly one that I think would encourage a lot of people. You probably do hear from people who want advice from what you've been through. What do you tell them?
I think the number one thing is the reason to persevere is huge. And so what I ask people is, what would you die for before you let happen? And it's a little bit of play on words intentionally to see where people's heart and really where your DNA is. Because I think people have like a programmed purpose in their DNA. And unless you're tapping into that, like you're just going to be continually frustrated and things are going to happen and your body's going to like manifest disease and all this other stuff. And so I ask them, like, deep down, like, what is your driving force? What would you lay your life down for before you let happen? And that typically forms the center and the core of everything else that they want to do. If I can identify that in you, I can link anything that you're working on to that purpose, and you will wake up every day like, I have to do this, otherwise this thing's going to fail. Right? Could be legacy, could be kids, could be spouse, parents, whatever, or purpose, you know? So that's what I tell people is you got to really deep dig into your purpose, and then the journey will reveal itself.